My name is Matt Hamann. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Rownd. We're trying to build the future of authentication across the internet and mobile and web, making it frictionless and adaptive and fitting better into the product-led growth strategy that a lot of companies have been adopting recently. But today I want to talk to you about how we kind of got Rownd off the ground. Of course, we're a seed stage company, so we're very much still in the thick of it. But I want to kind of talk about that, and as well as how we went through y-combinator, which is a startup accelerator, which we'll talk about here in a second. And just maybe you can learn something from our successes and our many failures as you maybe are interested in starting your own company. Now, how many people out there maybe have an idea that they want to turn into a business, or maybe you're actively working on it right now, or maybe you've even gotten it off the ground? Is there anybody out there that like that? Okay, a few people. I guess the rest of you all can just no, I'm just kidding. Please stay. At the root of building a company, the thing that you have to do is you have to make something that people want, right? And it's a very easy thing to say, but it turns out that actually doing that is a lot harder than you might think. Now, just to kind of set the stage for how some of this works, when you're building a company, a lot of times there's really two paths that a lot of companies take. One is bootstrapping the company, and the other one is going more venture capital accelerator route. Bootstrapping is kind of what it sounds like. You're trying to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You're maybe still working a 9-to-5 job. You're carving out time to work on your startup, your product on nights and weekends, and it can take a long time for things to really get going, right? You've got to find customers that are going to use your product. You've got to find people that are interested. You have to figure out how to make it make money, and you've got to figure out how to get it to the point where you can actually quit that 9-to-5 job to go full time, so you can really hopefully turn on the gas. And that can take a really long time and as I said, be very difficult. Not that going through another route, going through an accelerator, that's also difficult, but the advantage is accelerators are willing to give you some money in return for equity of your company, and that's what y-combinator is. It's more of the I'm looking for investors that will believe in the idea I have or the team that I have, and are willing to give me some money so I don't have to take an allowance from my current employer in order to put food on the table and a roof over my head. And there are a number of accelerators out there. These are some of the more well-known ones in the community. Y-Combinator, obviously. Techstars is probably the second most well-known. Plug and Play, which disclosure is an investor in Rownd. 500 Global Mass Challenge, and there's a laundry list of others that are maybe more regionally known or maybe not as nationally known across the ecosystem. So look, we went through y-combinator, and we would if you're trying to build a company and you're looking for folks that can help you build that company, we would also recommend that you go through y-combinator. Well, why? Why would we recommend that you go through y-combinator? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. One is they tend to be one of the most founder-friendly organizations out there. They focus a lot of their time and energy on doing things that are helpful to founders. They structure their equity in a way that is relatively founder-friendly. They have lots of former founders that have been very successful across the industry, across building companies that are working with you. And they just kind of get it. They've spent years and years refining the process of building successful companies, and they're very helpful in helping you figure out how to get your particular idea to work, or to realize that it's not going to work and you need to pivot. They have a ton of connections. They're very well known, and I'll show you some statistics as well that kind of weigh into this as well, and just the community that y-combinator has built. Once you're a y-combinator company, you have access to this gigantic community of other founders who have gone through the same things you have, that have failed in ways that they can help you, prevent you from failing, to be a cautionary tale, that they can just help you solve problems that, like, hey, I've never faced this before, we're facing this, how did you solve it? And they can give you great advice. And then probably one of the most popular or well-known aspects of it is the infamous demo day at the end of a y-combinator batch. A y-combinator batch is 3 months long, so there's 3 months of very intensive training and iteration on your product. But demo day is at the end, where you get to pitch this thing you've been working on to thousands of investors, many of them in Silicon Valley, in a network that you potentially wouldn't have access to, especially here, for us in the Southeast, where we're not kind of necessarily in the Valley community, right? And that's where a lot of the investors are. You know, you think of Andreessen Horowitz and Sequoia and other, you know, bigger names like that. They're in the Valley and they're connected here. Here's just a couple of graphs to kind of illustrate this a little bit more. Here we have y-combinator on the left, Techstars, Mass Challenge, 500 Global in column 4, and SOSV in column 5. This is you know, the cumulative exit value of startups that have gone through one of these accelerators, and you can just see that for the most part, you know, y-combinator is pretty consistent. You know, there's a lot more cohorts that are kind of in the pipeline right now. And I forget which company this was in like 2012 that just like kind of blew everybody else out of the water. But if you look at the combined like market cap of all the companies that have, you know, exited successfully of y-combinator, it's something like 600 million. The nearest competitor, which would be Techstars, is somewhere around 100 million. And this is maybe pre like economic instability, so those numbers might have changed a little bit. This was collected by PitchBook, I think, in December of 2022 or so. So you know, the numbers kind of speak for themselves there. Just another example, percentage of companies that have actually exited, you know, either through acquisition or IPO. You know, here it's a little bit more balanced between Techstars and y-combinator, and then you kind of have the rest of the field beyond that. You know, no guarantees obviously that you're going to successfully exit, but the likelihood perhaps is higher. And then here is you know, I think another chart that can be helpful, just in terms of how much capital a company has been able to raise after going through an accelerator. Y-combinator kind of blows the rest of them out of the water. Now the danger here is that just because you raise a bunch of money doesn't mean you're going to be successful, right? Just because an investor thinks, hey, you know, your idea is cool, I'm interested, I think it could go somewhere, I'm going to invest in it, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Infamously, I don't think this was a y-combinator company, but there was a company a couple years ago called Fast, and they were trying to build like the checkout of the future, you know, one click everywhere. You could see something you wanted to buy, you push a button, boom, it'll show up at your door, you know, a day or two later. And I think they raised something like $600 million or something. You have to check my facts on that, but they raised a ton of money and they blew through it and went bankrupt because they'd never found product market fit. And that is the danger of raising too much money, is you have so much you don't know what to do with, you feel like you need to deploy it immediately, and you just end up going broke because you never like really hone in, talk to your customers, and figure out, you know, how to build a sustainable business. Last slide on this, you know, why would I choose YC? Well, there's a bunch of household names here, at least probably for our community. You know, Stripe, Airbnb, you know, Instacart, DoorDash. Those are all things, you know, a lot of you have probably used. I've used a bunch of them. Reddit, GitLab, etc. You know, so there have been a lot of big name companies that have gone through y-combinator, so they have kind of the street cred to back up, you know, their name and their claim to fame. So the question is, you know, from your perspective, how do you get into y-combinator? Well, let me take a step back here a little bit and talk about a little bit of history, you know, in terms of Rownd. And as part of our history, we have to talk about a few, you know, false starts. Most companies actually go through quite a bit of iteration before they find their groove, and a lot of them end up pivoting. One pretty famous example is a company called Brex, which went through YC, and you know, they're a fintech, kind of like next-gen bank. A lot of startups use them, and they came into YC on the idea of, we want to build like a VR headset that's going to do all this awesome stuff. And they were working on it, and they were working on it, and they just weren't making it anywhere. And they were talking to the you know, partners at YC, and the partners were saying like, hey guys, maybe you should fall back on what you know. Like, what do you know? And they're like, well, we know banking, but we, you know, kind of bored with that. So they pivoted to banking, and, you know, I think they're doing pretty well these days. You know, worth quite a bit of money. So, you know, it takes a lot of iteration to actually figure out what is going to make sense, you know, for you and your company. And it's kind of like that thing that, this has happened to me a million times, you know, where you're lying in bed and you're like, ooh, that is a really great idea. And then the next morning you wake up and you're like, that's actually a terrible idea, you know. Sometimes it actually takes you 15 months before you realize it's a terrible idea, so the goal is to figure out that it's a bad idea as soon as possible. In the case of Rownd, we actually kind of started tossing around ideas in somewhere around 2019, and we thought, we were thinking about the fact that there's all these cars that now have internet connectivity, and all these companies are collecting data, you know, based on what's happening in the car. And that's actually kind of a problem, because you can uniquely identify who is driving the car based on the data coming out of the car, how they're braking, how they're accelerating, how they're, maybe even where their head is turning, where they're looking. And so that's actually a privacy concern. And so we said, okay, hey, there's all this data coming out of cars. We want to put that data in the hands of, the drivers of the cars, and then maybe they can use that data to get, or we can help them use that data to get like deals at Jiffy Lube or Take 5 or Meineke or different auto mechanics. But it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? We didn't have the data, so we couldn't go to the mechanics and say like, hey, join our network and offer customers 20% off or something like that for being able to kind of read their data and recommend times for them to come and bring their car into the shop. On the other hand, we couldn't get the data because we had nothing to go to these consumers with to say like, hey, come and give us your data. So we thought, okay, what if we build like a hardware device that someone can plug into their car that'll report the car's data to a dashboard, and we can actually offer them insights on how they're driving and how they can improve their driving. And then we can use the data that we're collecting to then later on come up with this ecosystem of consumers to auto mechanics and things like that. Well, the problem that we found is that no one thinks they're a bad driver. So you can't sell a device like that because no one's going to buy it. Thankfully, we realized that relatively quickly. We got into 2020 and into 2021, and we actually spent probably too long working on this, but we said, okay, forget the connected car part, let's just focus on data privacy. The General Data Protection Regulation in Europe was passed in 2016. California's Privacy Act was passed a few years later. So there's all these privacy laws that are coming to bear that are putting a lot of liability on companies that collect data from you and from me, and even if it's just first name, last name, email address, phone number, all that kind of stuff. And we said, okay, let's go to companies and say like, look, the world is not going to go back from these privacy laws. They're going to keep being a factor in how you do business. It's a big liability for you. So let us take the data and hold it for you and give you access, and then also help you bridge the gap between your business and your customers, so that if they ever come to you and say like, hey, I need you to delete all the data you have on me, you don't have to have your intern go and find all the data and then delete it or send it to them or whatever the case may be. They can just log into our dashboard. And so it's actually not too crazy an idea. There are companies out there that are working on this thing in different ways, and we took one angle on it, but we weren't really getting anywhere. We were having a problem where we would talk to a company and they would say, this is a great idea and this could really help us, not this quarter or not this year. And so what we didn't realize at the time is that was a signal that we hadn't found the right fit yet for our idea. And maybe we needed to really turn the idea on its head. Well, in the middle of this, we were trying to raise a seed round because we were still working at IBM, myself and my co-founders, we wanted to quit our 9-to-5 IBM job. We wanted to go full time on this startup idea, so we needed some capital. So we talked to dozens of venture capitalists, maybe on the order of magnitude of 100, and we got some like, okay, that's cool, maybe. We got some no's, we got some that's never going to work, and it was just a grueling process. And at the end of the day, like, we didn't get anybody to really give us any significant money. So that's just another kind of signal saying, hey, you haven't figured this out yet, or even enough to get someone to fund you to help you figure it out even further. We also applied to Y-Combinator, and the way that Y-Combinator application works is you fill out a written application online. It's relatively extensive. You record a 60-second video kind of talking about your idea, and then they review it, right? And so after they review it, they decide whether they want to interview you. So you get a 10-minute interview slot if you make it to that point. The acceptance rate for getting into YC is like 1.5% to 2%, like it's worse than Harvard. There are thousands of companies that apply every year. And so we applied, we actually got an interview somehow, and what happens after the interview is you either get an email, and if you get an email, that means you didn't make it. If you get a phone call, that means you did make it. And so we got the dreaded email. So we had no investors, we had no Y Combinator, so we're like, now what are we gonna do? Well, through some of the networking and even potential customers we had been talking to, we got connected with a group out of New York City called BetaWorks. They're a venture capital firm, and they also have kind of an incubator. And they said, hey, this was like right in the middle of COVID, so everybody switched to remote. And they said, hey, come join our like 3-month accelerator. You can do it all remotely. We'll help you, kind of work on this idea. they were running that summer on the idea of like, how do we reinvent the internet? How do we go to the next iteration of the internet? So there was like a couple like blockchain companies or like Web3 companies and us, because we were trying to turn data on its head and that sort of thing. And so we went. They gave us some money that actually allowed us to, myself and one of my co-founders, to quit our jobs at IBM, start working on this full time. And so we started iterating. And we got to the end of beta works. We still didn't feel like we'd made enough progress. We still didn't have the customers that we needed to. And so we said, okay, we still don't have enough money in the bank to really like take this full time with the number of people that we need. So what are we going to do? So we said, all right, if this was kind of like fall of 2021, we said, let's go ahead and reapply for Y-Combinator, the winter 22 batch. And if we don't make it there, then we can try to raise another seed round. We've got a little bit more traction than we had before. We can talk about the things we've learned and the progress we've made. So we applied to YC again. We already had the written stuff done. We recorded our new 60-second video. We got another interview, so that's great. A lot of companies don't even make it that far. And we got to the interview, and I mean, they just kind of raked us over the coals a little bit and asked us some like really hard, tough questions, and we weren't really sure, like, did we answer those confidently enough? Like, so we got off the phone and we were like, maybe we made it, but I don't know. And I think it might have even been the next day we actually got the call saying, hey, if you're interested, we're going to bring you into the winter cohort. And so we said yes, and got in, and that brings us to 2022. And before we get there, I will say that YC has the concept of a referral. So an existing YC company can refer, or founder can refer other companies to YC, and that can actually help you. I don't think we had any the first time, and we had one or two the second time. It's no guarantee. It just kind of moves your application maybe a little bit higher up the stack. But that, every little bit helps. So we get to 2022, and we kind of transition to this idea of authentication, because we were in YC for less than a week. I mean, I think it was like 3 days, and we realized, okay, we just need to abandon this idea because it is not working, at least for now. The world is not ready for it, or we're not building it the right way to actually make it work in the world. And so we said, if we're going to pivot, what are we going to pivot to? Like, we had no idea. And we were talking amongst ourselves, and we brought our third co-founder in, as well as a founding engineer at this point. And we said, what do we all hate? And somehow the thing that it was passwords. We all hated passwords. Like, I have to go to a site, I have to make a password, it has to be so complex, and then I have to store it in a password manager, and it's just it's a whole bit. And so we said, what if we kind of pivoted this business into the idea of getting rid of passwords and going to companies and saying, hey, adopt this authentication solution, get rid of passwords, it'll make it way easier for your customers, and you'll actually onboard more customers faster, because they're going through this much smoother, frictionless authentication process. So we started actually talking to potential customers before the product even existed, before we'd written a single line of code. And we went to them and said, like, hey, we're doing some user research, and we want to ask you some questions about your authentication, and we want to use the data that you're giving us to kind of help build our product. Well, the secret is that user research is just a backdoor into sales, because at the end of the call, you're like, okay, would you pay $200 for a solution that does this? And so if they say yes, then you're like, okay, well, would you be a customer, And if they say no, then you ask why not, and you use that knowledge to kind of build on what you're learning and how you're building your product. So our monthly recurring revenue went from basically zero for a really long time. This is one of those like famous Apple graphs that doesn't have any labels on it. They're just like, the thing is better. And it went pretty much zero until we pivoted to this idea, and you can see that like it immediately just started going up. Ironically, I'm not sure whether this is just a coincidence or not, but it looks a little bit like the startup curve, which is where you have this like great idea at the beginning, and then the novelty kind of wears off, and you enter this like deep dark depression until you start seeing maybe these little wiggles of, well, it's really false hope. Like, you think you're making it, but you're not. So we said, well, maybe these are the wiggles of false hope, and we're getting close to like the promised land / like shooting the rocket ship up and off. So that's kind of where we are today. We're still working on making something that people want, and we're making progress, and we're finding that we're getting closer to product market fit. We don't have it there yet, but It's kind of a day-to-day iterative process. You find more customers, you find people that maybe object to your thesis, and you work on tearing down those objections or building your product so that you can say, okay, now come and try it. We've taken your feedback into account and finding the right customer market fit, because this is really the key, is making something that people want. So if you're going to apply to Y-combinator, what does that look like? Well, the first thing that you should do is you need to find some great co-founders. So solo founders do make it into Y-combinator. There's some famous examples of that, but having a great team of kind of a CEO type who maybe is a little bit more business or product minded, a good technical co-founder, and I'm going to add a third one and say having a great design co-founder, that is something that has helped us immensely, because design is kind of, we had a talk earlier on design, right? Like, it's the thing that connects the technology with the sort of like standard or regular humans that aren't us technical types, right? You've got to have great design for that to work. So finding great co-founders is super important. You have to solve a real problem. If you go in there with just some solution to a problem that doesn't exist, you're not going to make it very far. You're never going to get that business off the ground, because nobody's going to be willing to pay for it. And you have to be confident. And so part of that is doing your homework, doing your research, talking to customers or potential customers, talking to people that might also have this problem, and finding out like what are the pain points, so that when the Y-combinator folks challenge you on this and say like, why on earth should we back this crazy idea that you have some data, or at least a good hypothesis as to why this is something that is actually going to end up working. And a lot of companies in YC end up pivoting, so just because you're confident doesn't mean you're right. And don't give up. There's, like I said, thousands of companies that apply to YC. They run 2 batches a year. There's thousands that apply to every single batch. I guarantee you that the majority of those companies that get rejected never try again. They're just like, oh well, we didn't make it. Well, I guess we'll go home and figure something else out. The companies that make it in, apply, get rejected, apply, get rejected, apply, get rejected, and eventually they make it, because they're learning throughout this process. Not only are they continuing to work on their business in between these spaces where like, well, I didn't get in this time, so maybe next time. They're continuing to work on their product, they're making it better, they're learning more about like what YC is looking for, and eventually the recipe kind of comes together, and they say, yeah, come on in, let's work together and figure this out. Once you actually get into YC and you can do it, leverage the YC standard deal. So they give you $125,000 for 7% of your company. That's what everybody gets. But recently, I think it was a couple years ago, in fact, we were the first batch to get this. They've now started offering an additional $375,000 on top of that. There's a few strings attached to that. It's called an uncapped safe. I'm not going to talk about exactly what that means, but it's a good deal. It's very founder friendly, because they do founder friendly things, but it just gives you essentially $500,000 worth of capital that you can go and make sure you have the right team members and you have some runway, so that you can kind of iterate and work on this idea and not have to worry about like, where's my next, how am I going to pay these bills and things like that. You've got enough to pay yourself a decent salary and that sort of thing. Well, as you're in YC, they have tons of experts and mentors. I already talked about this a little bit, that you can learn from. And there's 2 types of people that sometimes are in YC, the ones that listen to the mentors and the ones that don't. And the ones that don't, they tend to fail, and you can actually see that happening throughout the YC batches. Like, they're just not making progress. The ones that listen and pay attention, you'll see the numbers start to tick up, whether it's monthly users or monthly revenue or whatever the right metric for their company is. You'll see them making this progress, and you'll see how much different they look at the end of the batch as the beginning, because they're listening to that advice. As you're in YC, you get divided into sections of companies. So they're, depending on how many companies there are in the actual batch, might change how big or small the groups and sections are. You'll be in a section with other sort of similar companies, not competitors, but companies that might look similar to you in terms of how they're going to market or how they're thinking about building their product. And so you can kind of learn from each other. A lot of times you can even sell to each other and say like, hey, what would it take for you to be willing to pay for my product? Would this interest you? Would that interest you? And so it's a really great place to start networking. And you really have to aggressively attack the goals. The YC folks are going to push you to set aggressive revenue targets or aggressive user growth targets or whatever it is, probably more aggressive than you're even comfortable with. And you have to set those targets, and then you just have to figure out, all right, how am I going to get to these targets by the next time that they ask me, like, how are you doing on your goals? And all this is done in support of Demo Day, where you get to pitch to thousands of investors who are there looking for companies to invest money in, so that they can continue to grow and hopefully have a successful exit later. So let's talk just very quickly about fundraising. Dilbert's always got an opinion on everything fundraising related or business related, right? And VC is no exception. So just ask for $10 million. It's you'll get it every time, right? Maybe not. But in terms of actual fundraising tips, it's a full-time job. Usually it's kind of the CEO or the product person that does a lot of the fundraising. Maybe they do 98% of the work, and at least for us, he was on calls almost constantly every day for a month, maybe 2 months, working on fundraising, just talking to investors. And I don't think we actually really had, once we got into YC and we pivoted and we started showing traction, fundraising wasn't this climb up Mount Everest, but it was still really hard. And it's still really grueling days of hours of getting on the phone, and sometimes they need all the co-founders on the phone to chat about things, or they have questions that are more technical in nature, and stuff like that. Getting warm intros is very helpful as well. So if you leverage other people in the community, other people that that know investors that you're interested in talking to, and they can help you really make the connections that matter and that are going to help you take that next step. Use something called a SAFE. It's a simple agreement for future equity. It's the only way that startups should raise money, at least before they get to what we call a Series A, which usually means you've found product market fit. YC invented this, and it's a very founder-friendly document that most investors are on board with. And the only thing you really have to watch out for is sometimes they'll try to sneak in these different terms in what they call a side letter. Some side letters are fine, but other times they'll put some weird stuff in there. You just got to pay attention and make sure they're not trying to take you for a ride or give themselves an unfair advantage later on. And as I said, it's hard. You just have to keep at it, keep persisting. Eventually you'll get through it, and then you'll be off and away from that time and building your product and you're working on the stuff you really want to work on. Just in terms of parting advice, a lot of founders tend to think that they've got to build a really polished product and they've got to really get something that works really well before they launch it into the market. Don't do that. Launch even before you have a product, even if it just means you have like a simple marketing page with a wait list. Get it going, start talking to those customers, and just work on it. It's okay if it's imperfect. You'll learn things, and the thing is like there's how many people in the world? Like 8 billion. So the people that you showed something that didn't look very good to, they may not want to use your product, but there's still another 7 billion, 900 million, whatever that you can sell to. So it's okay. Do things that don't scale, which is again talking to customers and paying very close attention to the product and onboarding customers. Like we even bring customers into our Slack channels and talk to them one-on-one, and they actually have a direct line to ping us whenever they have a problem or they have a question. We can't do that forever, but for now, we can do things that don't scale because it teaches us so much that is going to help us later on in the life of the business. And you should charge starting on day one. A lot of people say, well, let me put something into the market that's free. Don't do that. Start charging, because that'll actually tell you what people value. And then ultimately, again, talk to your customers, learn from them, learn what their pain points are, and that'll help you build a truly successful company. Because at the end of the day, what do you need to do? Make something that people want, right? So thanks for your kind attention. Again, my name is Matt Hamann. The QR code goes to this deck, so if you want to click on any of these links and get any of these resources, you can. Paul Graham is the founder of YC. He's got some great essays on starting companies and making mistakes and how not to make mistakes. Some great stuff there. If you are interested in YC and aren't ready to apply, or you apply and don't get in, the YC Startup School is free. And it's a great place to get a lot of that advice without actually going through the full program. And then for those who are ready to jump on board, there's the YC application. Please reach out to me, email, Twitter. It's not called X, it's called Twitter, and LinkedIn. Happy to connect and happy to answer questions, now and in the future as you have them. So thank you very much.